people doing some weird stuff. So.
No, we're really glad to have you. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to fill in for Azel. He's having some connection issues, I think. So the objective of this is just to spend some time practicing mock interviews from both the perspective of the interviewer and the interviewee, and really just let everybody see how interviews can kind of typically be conducted and some of the problems that you run into while conducting an interview. So, Brian, we really appreciate you being here today to provide some industry experience into it and provide some questions that we might not have thought of or been able to find on the internet ourselves. So thank you for joining us. If we can, let's do a brief introduction. If you guys can just say your name, what you did in the Army, and then just a general role of what you're looking to do when you get out. Josh, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Sure. Hi, Brian. My name is Josh Morgan. I'm a 25 hotel in the Army, which means I have worked on multiple systems related to communications. That includes satellite communications, and more recently, over the past about year and a half, I've been working more on the joint network node that supports brigade level elements and provides internet to them.
All right. Cool.
Juan?
Hey, can I say something real quick? You guys hear me?
Yeah, we got you, Dimitri.
Okay.
Yep.
Hello, Brian.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. Sorry, I'm unfamiliar. Is Brian? Are you the one being the interviewer, so to say?
Yes, Brian is the senior IT, acting as a senior IT leader for the security analyst position.
Brian, I just want to say we're all in the other meeting with the client right now. I just want to stop in and say thank you very much for doing this. We really appreciate it. Appreciate the help with our interns.
I am happy to be here.
Hell yeah. If you guys need anything, John, shoot me a text and I can hop over. I'm just letting you guys know we're handling a client right now, so that's why we're not here right now. But we definitely want to link in after this and see how things went on your side of things, guys. But yeah, thank you. See you guys.
See you, Dimitri. All right, Juan, if you want to go ahead really quick. Oh, sorry, Brian.
Oh, go ahead.
Juan, I see that you're off mute, but I don't think we can hear you.
Yeah, I can't hear you.
I'll do a brief introduction for Juan. Juan, do you want to try to fix it really quick before we get started? Juan is currently he's a sergeant in the Army, right? Mm-hmm. And he is acting as a paralegal in the Army. So he's done a lot of work with contracting and then giving advice to commanders on how they can properly follow like regulatory guidelines and everything like that. Mm-hmm. Boris, do you want to go ahead while Juan's trying to fix his thing?
Do you hear me now, by the way? Oh, you can hear me?
Yep, you're good, Juan. Here, Juan, do you want to give it yourself just because now we can hear you?
I mean, yes, like he said, I've been a paralegal for 6 years, and I work most of the time I work as a paralegal. I did military justice, supporting the commander's intent on soldiers. Mm-hmm. So basically complying with policy and regulation. I did some administrative legal assistance. So, and that goes over also making sure that the company, for example, or the battalion is following policy and regulation, and we're making sure that there's no issues coming across, whether it's for budgeting or any finance. Mm-hmm. Like it's mostly for finance use of like the funds of the unit. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's like most of the experience I have.
Okay, cool. All right, my turn?
Yes, Boris, go ahead.
Hi.
Oh, I missed it.
Okay, my name is Boris Dayu. I'm a 92 Fox So is a petroleum supply specialist. So basically we
Mhm.
do like supply everything that is fuel. We stock the
Yep.
fuel and we do the distribution either for anything like aviation or like even if it's ground, we work on all of
Mhm.
those. And basically that's what we usually do. Sometimes we don't do anything on when we're on the monopole, but we do more work when you're on the field.
Mhm. Yep. Cool.
Thank you, Boris. Brian, if you wouldn't mind, I know I got access to your LinkedIn, but I don't think everybody did. If you wouldn't mind giving a brief introduction.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. From a military side of things, I started out in MI. I was enlisted right out of high school. Went to college, became an officer. I became an armor officer. I did that for 5 years or so, and then left active duty. Went into the National Guard. I was in the Iowa and the Minnesota National Guard, the 34th ID. In the Guard, I transitioned into a logistics role. So I started off ordnance as a maintenance officer. Um, did all the, as a XO, S3, all that good stuff, and then commanded a BSB on my last deployment. Commanded a brigade, and then I was the J6 for a while. I did some cyber stuff because of my civilian skills, and I just retired here about a year ago. And then on the civilian side of things, I did all kinds of stuff. So I started off kind of like my military career, is all over the place. When I left active duty, I was a manufacturing engineer for Alcoa, so in aluminum. I ended up going to work for Target. Target's where I made my transition after I deployed to Iraq, came back, made my transition into IT and IT security back before it was cool and sexy, and I ran Target's SOC, or Security Operations Center, right before the breach happened. Luckily, I left right before the breach. I've been a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, by title like 3 times, but by job role 4 or 5 times probably. I've been a CIO, Chief Digital Officer, and then most recently I've transitioned into starting my own company with a friend of mine from back in my Target days. We're starting a entry-level cybersecurity training company, taking a little bit different approach than the cert companies and that kind of thing. So, and that's where I'm at now.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate you being here. Going to give a brief overview of how the scenario is going to play out for everybody. We're going to start off with the hiring manager, played by Boris, go into the human resource manager, played by Josh, then go into the technical subject matter expert, that'll be played by me, and then to you, Brian, for the senior IT leader. Juan is going to be the candidate. This is the security analyst job posting. For everybody except for Brian, please try to keep your questions down to about 5 minutes so that we can do a review at the end of this, and we're not just grilling Juan for the remainder of the hour. Boris, if you would like to start us off with the first question as the hiring manager, and just try to conclude your questions by 4:30.
Okay. Hi, Juan. I'm your hiring manager. I'm gonna go with a couple questions I have for you. Question: do you have to say all the question, or I can say just one? And
Say one question and let him respond.
okay, all right,
And then continue, and then once your time's up, we'll stop.
okay. Juan, could you describe a situation like a challenge that you face when in previous role, and how you approach the situation to solve it?
Yes. I had a situation come up on one of the trials for in Korea, and It was a not necessarily a high profile case. I mean, the the soldier was a E7, and we needed to get a piece of evidence secured in order for us to be able to keep the trial going on our side of the trial. And the fence was pushing was like we're doing a motion, and their argument was that this part of the evidence didn't have the date stamps on it and some time stamps on it. And I was able to go back and edit the piece of evidence, um, zooming out everything with my program and a standalone computer, and fixing the issue and emailing everything to the trial counsel at the trial. And we successfully conducted a trial, and at least that part of the evidence was secured. So
Okay. Um, how do you get like an update with information, or let's say like they have new update about technology and stuff like that? How do you get update about it? Like, what do you do as a research or material that you get to be on it?
mainly social media, especially YouTube, because it's more informative. It's like the video format. Because I get more detail about what's trending in the industry. Um, and it just happened to be an easier tool for me. I'm used to use YouTube a lot, so I would say that's my main way of getting or staying up to date.
Okay. My last question for you will be, how could you handle a situation where a security recommendation you made confidential with a business code?
I would. Can you repeat the question?
How could you handle a situation where a security recommendation you made it to someone to attain the goal in a business? I think that last question I didn't really work on it, so it's kind of like hard for myself to like rephrase it or like try to modify.
Mhm.
You're good,
I
boy.
think
Juan,
You want me to give a stab at it?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, Juan, how would you handle a situation when you're trying to tell me I need to do something for security, but meanwhile the business is like, hey, man, we can't do that.
so. I'm telling you to do something to secure, like for security, but the business is like it goes against the business rule.
It's causing pain and friction with the business for some process that they have.
I'll try to sit down with the business reps and whoever I'm working with for the security solution to try to get into like the same page together, so we all can get to the same page and then work from there. Communication,
Cool.
but like mostly trying to bring everybody in so that we can all um, have our opinions heard, and then like mix everything together, find a solution. Because I feel like that's it. Like it will fix the problem faster than me trying to get like on my own end, trying to have a conversation with just the business and then my worker.
Thank you, Ron. That's all I have for you for now.
Thank you, Boris. Josh, would you mind beginning? Josh is the human resource manager.
No problem. Okay, Juan, I'm interested in how you will be a good fit for this company. So my first question is, describe a time when you worked on a security goal that required collaboration with colleagues from diverse backgrounds and skill sets.
I would say from a security standpoint, um, can you repeat the question? I think I have an answer, but I just want you to like repeat it so I can think of it.
Yes, so if you were working on a security goal, or you can talk about any goal in your work experience, Describe how you collaborated with colleagues from diverse backgrounds and skill sets.
To get to this goal, kind of, I don't know why, but I think going back to the communication aspect to get for example, let's say we need to update this full record of like actions for the unit, and some of these cases have some PII. That's a security risk. So our goal will always be to have all the piece of like the PII redacted before it's sent out to any third parties. And by in a way to do that involve everybody doing it is using our own system that we have. But I mean, we have an integrated system we use specifically for these things. It's called Military Justice Online. So uh, security wise, it's kind of a easy way to just go in the system, find the action you need, and then redact the portion, then label the redaction as this is the reason why it was redacted. It could be that there was like personal information, or it could be that there was some finance information that's not to be seen for like out for the public. So how would I work with others? I think also that's also part of the question is I would ensure that we are following the steps, the safe, like even the most little steps. There's steps to it, and making sure everybody following the steps to secure. We have a list printed out to make sure whether this action requires to be redacted or not, or will we just have like a list out for each action.
Okay.
Sorry, I wanna make a stop. Should I be making my answers shorter?
No, you're fine. That was fine time. I got to, my questions are going to require a certain amount of thinking and explaining on your part. So that's up to me to produce those questions that can get a quick answer or not. Okay. Can you provide an example of how you've contributed to building a strong team culture in your previous roles? Just one example.
Let's say strong team culture. Making sure everybody feels involved and we're working together at some point or level. Even though you can have your own part of it, like the job, say, for example, you only work on certain actions that are required to be seen by this office in particular. Because we work by unit, we separate our units in different offices. So let's say I would work for I will have 2 battalions for myself, and the next person will have another 2, and then those are his. Sometimes to make sure that everybody feels like a team, I'll offer help, or my leader, or me as the leader, I will offer help to the other team members, and then ask them, hey, if you need any help, or if you need to see, like, you can check my tracker to make sure, or I can check yours to make sure that we are hitting the same goal for these actions that are exactly the same. And if I can help as well, like on working on his, asking questions as well is another thing. I like to ask questions if I'm not certain about anything. So to make sure I don't have to go back and forth to fix anything. So I feel like to be involved and feel as a team, we had to have mostly open communication. Yeah. So feeling involved, talk, like ask questions, um, offer help when you can, ask for help as well.
Okay. My next question is, how do you balance the need for maintaining a strong security posture, like you were talking about PII, right?
Mhm.
While also fostering a positive and inclusive work environment?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, I kind of missed it.
So the question is, how do you foster a positive and inclusive work environment. When you have access to your organization's information that requires a strong security posture, such as with your PII, like you mentioned?
I'll make sure that that's like the boundary that needs to be met. That safety, I mean, the safety guidelines are met. However, I would still try to maintain a positive environment by being familiar with my team. I would say have some level of like being some level of being personal, like personable to like at some level. I don't need to know like exactly, like I don't need to be like best buddies or anything, but you need to care enough for others, and I feel like that would bring a positive environment. It's just like that human caring connection level. I feel like that's what keeps it positive. Knowing and understanding that other people have their lives as well, other than I mean, job guidelines needs to be met, but as well, we know that sometimes people can have problems, or you need to be understanding of your environment to keep a positive environment.
Okay, that's all I have for you at this time. I'll pass it over to our technical subject matter expert.
Thank you, Josh. Hey, Juan, my first question is, imagine that a 0-day vulnerability was discovered in the software, and the software is critical to your organization. What immediate steps would you take after that discovery was made and it's still awaiting a patch?
Let's see if we can patch. I would get on the job as soon as I can, because I know it's an emergency. So what steps, technical at the technical level, I can't tell you. Your mic is muted.
Thank you. What factors would you consider when configuring a firewall rule? And then why would that factor be important when balancing the security and functionality of that rule?
Building a firewall. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah. What factors do you consider when configuring a firewall rule to balance that rule with security and functionality?
I can't think of the answer right now.
That's okay.
Yeah, looking at his background, that's I don't know if that's a fair question.
One, what process would you use to mitigate a security threat when it comes to like internal data sharing?
Making sure that we have layers that are working from the top, like from the bottom to the top. All the layers of security are working, and then just making it like double checking that they work.
Okay. Could you go into that a little bit more? What you mean by layers?
The layers of security, of control for security, for example. I can't really go too much into in depth, but yeah, I can't really go too much in depth. It literally is just looking. I'm listening. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have. I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
All right. So typically how I would start this, just so you guys know, is I would just say, hey, Juan, just tell me about yourself. And we already did the introductions, so I'll skip over that. But just think about, I mean, I'm sure that I'm just preaching to the choir here, but that's, tell me about yourself. That's like your opportunity to tell me all the things that why I would want to hire you. Essentially, right? Sell your, just talk about, and I would really focus on things like leadership, adaptability. Um, you know, a great answer, I think, was when you said, you know, I'd use YouTube. You know, in security, YouTube and Google the shit out of things. And so having, you know, come across like the kind of person like, hey, you know what? I don't know anything about that, but I'm going to go figure it out. And so and then I would just say, hey, so Juan, why do you want this role? What's appealing to you about it?
I would say the security. Can you hear me? Is
I can hear you. Yep.
okay. I don't know why I can hear myself as well. I think it's like I can hear my voice too. It's kind of I don't know. Hold on, let me feeling. I would say the my dad was so like he works as a software engineer, and this whole world was appealing to me because I always watch him working on certain things. He would work on apps. He would work on other programs, and from that perspective, I had like my view. Like I always seen him doing that since little. So
All right. And I'll save that question. But so how would you foster a culture of security awareness and compliance across different teams and different departments in an organization?
I would try to involve people for trainings. I would try to make training blogs for the organization if allowed by the company. If I can steal some of the time for training, or if I can at least send up training material, I would try to make it to a level of understanding for everybody.
Um, looking through these questions here, and I don't know if they're really fair for this level of a role. So kind of teeing off of that, when you think about the role of security and regulatory compliance, how do you ensure the bank remains compliant? This should be right up your sock too, Ali. With standards and regulations. Then I'll add in the twist of while considering business needs and processes.
Not the same. Perfect. Um, I think the one as that loses there would be the business because they have to adapt to the comply like to the level of compliance the bank needs to meet because it's a set of it's a set of regulations that need to be followed. And if there's anything that's being break, then it's my job to make make my speak my voice and say, well, these are the things that or that I think I should be done in order to keep security. And at that point, if there's no security, if the bank is meeting the requirements, but the business is having issues, then they have to comply, or is it's going to be their responsibility at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so I assume through the interview process here, you've had the opportunity to get to know the bank a little bit and get to know the team and all that kind of thing. And why should I hire you?
Sorry, what? So, wait, can you repeat the question, sir, please?
Yeah, I'll just make it simple. Why should I hire you?
Be- yeah, that's the question. I prepared myself for that question, but I didn't think. Like I'm having like a
It's
soup.
simple and it's so hard. Yep.
Yeah, it's like I have a soup in my brain right now of words, but it's like I read the question and I
Yeah.
read my answer.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah. I would say because my ability to adapt. I learned a lot of skills during my time in the military, and one of those, the best skills I had, is like sitting in a room, having no context at all whatsoever of what's going on, giving a notepad and typing, making notes of entire hearing, and interviewing victims or possible witnesses of a case without no context, sitting there, getting all that, piling it up, and then mainstream it into this information system, putting everything together, and then bring a work product for my attorney that works for the case. I would say that's my biggest, like, adaptability is my like one of my biggest things. I can adapt really well, and I'm personable. I can get along with team. I'm the kind of person who can sit down and have a conversation, almost anything, but also focus on the job mission as well. Knowing that in the back of my head, like this is what needs to get done. That everybody has a common goal here in this section. And this is what we're here for, essentially.
That was a good one. That's one I would encourage you to think about is the adaptability. Just like, hey, military, I had to do this. I didn't know anything about that. I had to go figure it out. And same way, when I come to work for you, like you asked me to do something, I'm going to tell you, if I don't know how to do it, I'm going to tell you I don't know how to do it. And then I'm going to go figure out how to do it. And I'm going to do it well, and I don't, I'm not going to get hung up on, you didn't train me. I haven't done it before. I don't know, I'm just going to go figure it out. So that's a huge attribute that is very important. And so when you think about that, incorporate that into the tell me about yourself, like a little story in there about some little adaptive, like something that you did that you had, like you just said, you had to sit through, you had no idea what they were talking about. You had to sift through it, figure it out, sort it out, and organize it, and then, and then move forward with it. So that's a good one.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
And then the other thing, like you're going to get hung up. I don't care how many times you do this. There's going to be a time where you're just going to draw a blank, and it could be like the stupidest question on the planet, like, hey, where are you from? And you just like draw a blank for whatever reason, right? I mean, that's an extreme one, but in your back pocket, just have something to try to transition to. The ones that really mess you up usually are hey, tell me about a time you did X and you never did X. And you're like, oh man, I don't know how to talk about that. So instead, tell a story and say, well, you know what? I've never approached that, but this is similar to how I did this, or here's how I would approach that. Here's how I think about those kind of problems, that kind of a response, and be able to flex and just think on your feet.
Okay.
And if you get hung up, don't shit your pants. You just got to keep moving. It happens all the time. You interview people and they just like, bam, and you're like, oh man, all right. And and then sometimes the interviewers will like, yeah, I get it, because it's happened to me. And other times, you'll just, they might be dicks, they might whatever. It just depends, so.
If I would have done that at a real, like actual sitting down in front of like a desk of people and in a like a job for interview, and I would have answered that like,
Yeah.
oh, I just have like a super words right now. I I think like that
Mhm.
would go really bad, but I was able to pick up myself there. I had a better written. I just thought of it like I'm gonna just say it like this, and it just came out like that.
Yeah.
And how do you think that would have been if it was like a real scenario?
Well, I mean, I think I'm looking at your background and I'm looking at these questions, and these questions aren't necessarily fair for, I mean, it is for the role that we're talking about, but it's really not fair for your background. I think for you, you're a better fit for governance, risk, and compliance roles, GRC roles, with your SOC experience and that kind of thing. And these questions, like, how would you think about what you're going to do with the firewall, just doesn't fit, And so, and I've had that. I mean, I interviewed for a CISO role, and they put me in front of an architect, or set me down with an architect, and he asked me, well, if this happened, this event happened, or blah, 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 what would the logs look on the security, the security logs on the firewall look? And I just looked at him, I said, this isn't going to be a fit, because I am not here to be a firewall guy. And that's not, if that's what this role is, then thank you very much. I'm just going to call it right now. So keep that in mind too. Like, the interview process is two ways. Like, I've had numerous roles where I came out and I went to interview and went through the whole day, and I came out of it and I'm like, nope, there's no way I'm ever going to work there. And so sometimes you'll get some weird questions, and then don't let that hang you up, and what's funny is, like, that firewall, that question, I actually ended up hiring one of his peers later at a different company, and that guy's like, oh yeah, that dude, yeah, I would listen to him do that. I'm like, what the hell is his problem? Like, everybody knows, like, that's Joe. Like, Joe's just not good at interviewing. He asks stupid questions, which, I personally wouldn't have them interview, but sometimes from a technical standpoint, it makes sense. But, and sometimes you'll get hostile people, but take that all into account, because it's like, hey, you know what? I don't need to come work here. If you're going to be a jerk, I just don't need to come here. Like, and going with the attitude of, they're interviewing me, but I'm interviewing them too. And I want to make sure this is the kind of company I want to work for, the right culture, the right people, and those kind of things. And you'll get a lot of that you'll pick up a lot of that through especially through the hiring manager. The HR people are usually pretty good indicators of the culture of the company, that kind of thing. So,
Okay.
and I guess sometimes you just need a job, right? So then maybe you take one that whatever, but give them a chance.
Right.
Always keep a iron in the fire, so that you always have options. But yeah. So
Thank you,
sorry, I
sir.
don't know if I'm derailing here or not. So I always
No. I really appreciate the insight. That's really good. I think it keeps me in my feet. Like, okay, it's also both ways.
Yeah.
I need to be sure that they kind of in a way of
Yeah.
meeting my standard of like I want to work here. So yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing I would encourage you to do, looking at your resume here, so you've done some SOC 2 types of things,
Mhm.
compliance roles, or auditing kind of things. So when you get a weird question that you're not really sure how to answer, just go back to your SOC framework and think about, if I ask you a question, SOC is not necessarily my strong suit compared to some of the other frameworks, but they're all kind of the same. But, if they ask you a question about identity and access management, you're like, fuck, I don't know anything about that. Think about SOC 2. What will SOC 2 tell you to do?
Right.
And then pivot off of that, and just, and that kind of thing, or use some of the things you saw in your SOC 2 audits and just tell a story, like you're talking to one of your buddies about something that you did or whatever. And obviously use different language maybe, but think about telling a story. Like, I know there's STAR and there's all these different interview answering frameworks, but just tell me a story. Like, especially when I ask you about yourself, just tell me about yourself. Like, just tell me. And in that, weave in that process about, like, toot your own horn, like that. And a lot of people have a hard time doing that. Like, tell me why you're so great. And, that kind of thing. So just have a couple of those, like, hey, here's a pretty generic thing about leadership. I'm not really sure what to do with this, but I'm going to have it it's an example in my back pocket. Maybe I can pivot off of it. And even if you get it wrong sometimes, because sometimes, like, the interviewer asks a question and you answer it, and after they're done answering, you're like, man, I don't even know what he just said. It had nothing to do with the question I asked, but it was a pretty good answer, and you get, like, you just kind of roll with it. So just think on your feet, be flexible. That's and try to keep, and if you screw it all up, man, just keep rolling. Keep rolling.
Right.
That's what I'd tell you, That was a question. Now you're on a new one. Just start all over again. Like nothing ever happened.
Thank you.
So
we're going to open it up. Josh and Boris, if you guys have any comments, any suggestions, because I know we've all been Googling this, but we haven't really got the opportunity to do it or see it yet. So any suggestions or comments? Juan, I know it's really hard to be in an environment where you're just uncomfortable and people are asking you questions and you're under a microscope. So I really appreciate you putting yourself out there and attempting all these questions. I know that.
Thank you.
But I hope you kind of get the first one out of the way where, that felt really weird and nervous, and then the next time you do it, you're a little bit more used to being nervous, and then you keep going, and eventually you're just not nervous.
I'll say thank you, because it helps, I think. Absolutely, like you said.
So for me, what I'm gonna say is he did a great job. The only thing I will say is he need more, like, he can work a little bit better on how he answer. I don't want him to, like, for me, I don't think it's to give too much detail about the answer. Like, he can give, like, not talk too much and just give a little bit, because sometimes when you give too much, they take note and they might ask you other question based on and you might forget what you just respond to, So that's my big thing that I just thought about. Other than that, he was all right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, looks like Brian ran out of time to be on the stream.
He might have dropped. I'm messaging Rod to see if he just got booted out and we can get back in.
Okay.
But I think Brian's best suggestion is like the tell a story thing, because it's hard to just like point blank answer questions. It's rough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like just to sit there and like immediately have an answer to a question is crazy. So if you frame it as a story, it can be a little bit easier to talk about it, because it's it's about you. You can talk about it a little bit more. It sounds a little bit more fluid.
Brian's there.
Okay, I got you.
Are we gonna get access? Because I want to see the video. Like,
Yeah.
Okay. Just self, like, analyze.
Brian, Rod should be adding you back shortly into this stage so we can hear you. I'm sorry, Juan. What did you say?
I was saying I just want to self-analyze later. That'll be good.
Yeah.
That'll be perfect.
Yeah, there's like a link made from this. That's what's cool about it. It'll save it all.
So just thinking about it from a human resources standpoint, I'm not the best at this at all. But the questions that I asked, I think that you kind of you answered like what you did in your job, but you didn't necessarily get to the point of this is how I communicate with people, and this is how I know my teammates and like their backgrounds and how their backgrounds affect their perspective. Because you do have to take that into consideration in a workplace. It's like how, like, you know, how they say in the Army, perception is reality. You do have to consider that a little bit in the private sector. So even if you're in a security analyst job or whatever, just when you're talking to human resources, I guess just try to hit on those key points of like what was in the outline, which is like, how do you communicate and how do you bring your culture to the work culture?
Okay.
But I don't really have any questions for Boris as far as like his experience right now. I'd probably save whatever I have for the end, I guess.
1 sec. I'm sorry, Brian. I'm trying to get off.
Oh, sorry. I kind of did started to derail a little bit.
I mean,
with the
Brian,
HR
sorry.
question.
Sorry.
He's
There you
back.
go.
All right.
All right.
Sorry about that.
I heard a lot of that. I was just sitting backstage. Yeah, and that's I mean that's the problem with when you start freaking out a little bit, or you're not like, man, I don't know how to answer that question. You can find yourself kind of talking too much, which is probably the
Right.
exact opposite you should do when you don't know how to answer a question. But that's just human nature, right? And so that's where I liked that comment about you know, how you get along with others and how, you know, the perception's reality and that kind of thing. And here's what's tricky about all this, right? So for someone like me, when I interviewed, I just interviewed for fit, because I'm like, well, I've seen your resume. My technical guys have talked to you. I know you can do the job. Now I just got to figure out if I want you to do the job. You know, if you're going to be a good fit on my team. But other CISOs would be, you know, that are more technical, or people that have been IT their whole lives, like they're gonna, you know, that's what they're gonna focus in on, is what they know. And so I would just say that if you get a technical question you can't answer, shift it to something you can answer, right? Like, hey, I don't know how to answer that, but I do spend a lot of time, you know, building relationships with other people on my team, other people in IT. I know how to Google things. I know how to ask questions. I'm not afraid to say I don't know how to do something, but I will tell you I'll figure out how to do it. So going back to that, just bring it all the way back to that. Like, I don't know, but I'll figure it out. I don't know, but I'll figure it out. And then the other thing I would tell you is that, especially with some of these compliance roles, when they ask those questions about, well, how do you balance compliance with the business needs and business culture? You know, and I think you did a good job with that, because in a lot of ways, because I mean, there's certain security regulations and rules that are laws, they are government regulated. It's like a no shit, you got to do this. There's no negotiating with this, right? We just got to do it. But then there's other times where you got some wiggle room. And so that's where the example I would use is that, or how I would answer those questions is, 90% of the time I can work with the business and I'll figure out a way to get to yes. And that's how I phrase it. How do you get to yes? We'll figure out how to work together to get to yes, to get the outcome we need. Because I don't care how we get there, but we need a certain outcome. And part of that is educating the business of why it's important, working with them so they can still do their jobs. And then the reigning 10%, I keep that in my back pocket for when I got to say, dude, I'm sorry, but we got to reset all the passwords in the entire company right now because this is happening. And there's no room for negotiation. I know it's disruptive. I know it's going to suck. I know all of our customers are going to be pissed off because I just reset all their passwords, but that's what we got to do. And then you've built up all that. So by doing that, I've built up all the equity because they know I'll work with them when I can. And then they also understand when I say we got to do a certain thing a certain way and I don't have a choice, they understand that, they believe it because they've seen how I work. You know, that thinking about that. And and then the other piece of it is hey, you know what? I spend time, I build relationships, not just with people on the team and people in IT, but I'm also getting to know people in the business because I want to understand what's important to the business. I want to make sure I understand our business. You know, so different industries have different things that are important, right? That you might not think about, like, you know, getting people to sign up for credit cards at Target is a big deal sometimes because they're pushing credit cards, you know, and that system's really important because it's a sales driver that, you know, wouldn't necessarily top of mind think about. The only way you know that is you're talking to the business, you know, and you're starting to understand the kind of things and approaching security as an enabler. So can I help the business do what they need to do, but we're going to do it securely, because if we don't, then you're really going to have a disruption, right? So
Okay. Thank you.
but I think one of the things you'll find, and it's a little bit counterintuitive too, is that there are a lot of senior leaders in companies that want business people that are willing to come in and say, no, we have to do it this way. You don't have a choice.
Okay.
They want to know the no shit, we got to do this way sometimes, you know, as well. So they're looking for strong security leaders that aren't going to get steamrolled by the business, because that doesn't help them either.
Right.
And I think a lot of that, what I'm saying, is probably not fair for the level or the role that you're looking at, the level you're looking at it. But it's good to have that mindset at all different levels of security. Thinking about it like that, thinking about it like you are, you know, you're just another part of the business. Just like you could argue HR doesn't do anything for sales, but HR does a lot of really important things for the business, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then Brian, with just 8 minutes left, the question we all have is, you provided that example of, you know, getting this really hard interview question. Were there any trends while you were doing interviews that you noticed that we should be aware of, as far as just really how the process works and kind of what expectation you should have for interactions during that process?
You know, that's a good question. It's really interesting how much it varies by companies and the company culture. You know, I've been in interviews, like really important interviews, where I was sitting in this tiny room with 3 business leaders who were sitting on both sides of me. Like I wasn't even facing them, and I had to like pivot my chair back and forth and do stuff, and you know, or people that just don't show up to the interview, or they ask really stupid questions, or they come in with this condescending attitude of like, you're really just privileged to come work for me. And so the thing to think about or remember is that the people that you're interviewing with will typically be really busy. Most of them won't be like, I've literally done thousands of interviews for all kinds of different roles, everything from warehouse workers to, you know, director of whatever, to VPs, to I'm trying to think of all the different ones. But and there's times where I was actually coaching the interviewer, like, hey, I think I know what you're asking me here, you know, and kind of help walk them through it. And so the people that you're interviewing with are people as well, and they're busy, and I may have just walked out of a board meeting where I got my ass handed to me, and now I'm trying to shift gears to interview you, you know, or I'm dealing with an incident that's a big deal, and I'm trying to shift gears to interview with you, or my wife's mad at me. Like, I mean, it could come a lot. I mean, my dog ran away. There's all kinds of things, right? So don't take anything that the interviewer does, says, or how they act personally. None of it personally, because even if it is something directed at you, it's really about them. And the big thing is just stay strong, stay confident. You know your shit, right? Go in there. Hey, this job is mine if I want it. Give yourself a little pep talk and go in there with confidence. And even when you fuck up a question, if you're confident, then it's gonna come across, and you're not gonna know everything. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, these job descriptions are ridiculous half the times. They're just wish lists, and nobody has all of it. So I'm gonna sooner or later I'm gonna ask you something, and some interviewers are going to try to get you painted in a corner. They're gonna try to get you ruffled. They're going to try to do those things. They're going to be a little more hostile about it because they're just, they, for whatever reason, they've decided that's the way to interview. And I was accused of that when I was younger, like, hey, you're the worst person to interview with. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And the thing is I'd ask questions, but I just keep a really blank, emotionless face because I didn't want to tell you if you're good and I didn't want to tell you if you're bad. I just wanted to, I didn't want to skew your answers by my nonverbal signals, which is kind of I didn't think of it at the time. It's kind of a dick move. It's hard to interview with somebody that gives you no nonverbal feedback. And I'm like, all right, well, that's not who I want to be. So I changed that, but you're going to, and the biggest thing is don't take anything personally in these interviews. I don't care what they say. It's about them. If they say, well, why am I even talking to you? You're not even like, you're not a fit for this role at all. And that's just that person trying to feel important. It's really not about a statement about you. It's not, you are what you are, and that's it. So, if they say that, then flip into your, hey, I can do anything. Man, I was in the Army. I can do anything. I mean, dude, I was an S1 as a tank officer. Like shit, I didn't know shit about, and I was terrible S1, by the way. And there's a good reason that they've shifted to now HR, AG officers or HR and S1s and not guys like me, and, but man, you guys can figure anything out, and and you're not afraid to figure it out. So boom, why should I even interview? Like, dude, you were a paralegal. What the hell do you mean? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it does make sense. Here's exactly why this makes sense. Being a paralegal is like exactly the same in so many ways as being a GRC, audit SOC 2 compliance person. And here's how it is. Boom, boom, boom. It's just different details, but the same methodology, the same questions, the same kind of approach. Because you got to do things, blah, blah, blah. You get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and just the more you do this stuff, the better you'll get at, the more confidence you'll get, the more whatever. But I don't care. I mean, I've done a gajillion interviews, and I will guarantee you, like right now, I'm out of practice. And if I had to go interview again, who knows how that would work? I'm sure I would stumble.
Nice.
So.
That's the thing you got to continuously do.
Yeah, and don't get too rigid either. I mean, that's the thing I found myself doing in the past. Like, man, I went out to internet or whatever, and probably even before the internet, and got a list of questions and studied the questions, and I was ready to answer all the questions. And you go in the interview, they won't ask you any of those questions. They're not going to ask you any of them. Like, that's just Murphy's Law, right? But there's a few that that they're going to ask. Like, tell me about yourself, right? And then you can pivot all kinds of places from that. And then the story that you create about tell me about yourself can be used to answer all kinds of other questions too. And so, and don't be afraid to just say, hey, and they say, well, how would you configure the firewall to do whatever? You can say, you know what? I don't know anything. I don't know the firewall. I'm not a firewall guy. This isn't a firewall role, but I'll tell you how I'd handle it is I'd go find my buddy, the firewall guy that I built a relationship with, and I would talk to him about how do we approach this? How do we, X, Y, and Z? And, it's just that can do. I don't care what you're asking me to do. I can do it. I can put a man on the moon, man. If you give me enough money, I can do it. I can do anything. And so you guys can too, right? I mean, you just need enough time and money, you can do anything. So just remember that. Burn that in the back of your brain. And I will tell you, one of my best security analysts she was a medic for me when I was the BSB commander, who decided she wanted to get in IT. She got a help desk role just to get her feet wet. And I hired her as a security analyst with zero experience because I knew no matter what I did, like I'd ask her stuff like, hey, I need you to go do this, Amanda. And she's like, you know what? I don't know anything about that, but I'm going to go figure it out. And she would go figure it out. And she'd go bust balls and get stuff done because she wasn't going to take no for an answer from anybody. I would take her over 20 years of technical experience from some of these guys. You know? So that's the person you want to be, Amanda. I'm going to tell you right now, you want to be Amanda. And show me your Amanda through this process.
Brian, that's some fantastic advice. I really appreciate it. I think we all really appreciate you coming. And Juan, we appreciate you being the candidate for this one. I know it's not always easy. We're going to swap over to the next one. Brian, if you'd like us to contact you or stay in touch with you, please feel free to drop your information, or if you'd like to stay in for the next call or the next mock interview scenario and criticize some more, feel free to do so.
I do have to drop, but I would encourage all you guys that if you want, connect with me on LinkedIn. Man, that networking is everything, you know, and by connecting with me, then you get access to my network. I get, you know, that whole thing builds. So that, you know, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or whatever the heck that is kind of thing. So.
That's good. Thank you,
All
Brian,
right.
for all the insight. It was really helpful.
Yeah, and if you, and again, reach out LinkedIn or however, if you have some questions, you're like, you know, afterwards you're driving home, you're like, man, what about? I'm happy to help. So.
Also, Boris and Josh, thank you so much for your insight too, for your comments. I think that was good too, because I will analyze the video again and take notes. Yes, I got some notes to take. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm bummed I missed Brian's speech about Amanda or whoever it was.
Amanda crushed it.
Security.
Amanda was the best.
Who is Amanda?
Whatever.
Amanda
Brian
was the best. Joe, Ryan, thank you for both coming in for this. My name's John. I'm gonna guide us through the scenario and be the candidate for it. Today we're really just trying to. We know this is an unconventional interview, but we're just trying to put each other through the ringer a little bit so we can all get some experience of what interviews can be like and how we are failing to answer questions properly or things like that, just to give everybody some experience with interviews before we have to go do our real one. We're going to start it off briefly with a quick introduction of everybody. Juan, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, so sure. I'm Juan Carlos Brito. I'm from Dominican Republic. Moved to the U.S. in 2018, and I joined the military and became a paralegal. And I've been doing this for almost 6 years. Most of my experience comes from military justice and administrative law, legal assistance, and that's that's what I've been doing for a while.
Thank you, Juan. Josh, you like to go?
Sure. Hello, gentlemen. I'm Joshua Morgan, and I've been in the Army for 6 years. I'm in the Signals MOS. I'm a 25 hotel. I did a lot of on-the-job training in order to be proficient in satellite communications. In the teams that I was part of, there's a lot of cross-training involved, and that was very helpful to make me prepared for my future, hopefully in tech jobs, IT, whatever that happens to be in the future. And in the past year and a half, I've been on joint network node teams that provide internet services to brigade level elements. So that means we're providing network access to from dozens to up to 100 users. And that's just about my experience there.
You're a Trojan Spirit guy.
Sorry?
Were you a Trojan Spirit guy?
Negative.
Okay.
Boris, would you mind going?
Yes. My name is Boris Dayu. I'm a 92 Fox. I'm having like 3 years in the army right now. As a 92 Fox, we work on supply everything that has like fuel. Like we stock the fuel, we distribute the fuel, we we take them to the lab, we study them, and that's basically what I did in the army. But before the army, I had a bachelor in business administration. I did some training as a Linux admin. I did a couple of like contract, like 6 month contract before I joined the army. So that's basically my background.
Thank you, Boris. Ryan, would you mind giving a brief introduction of yourself?
Of course. It's been a long time since I was in the military. I did a few years back in the day, in the 90s, as an 88 officer. So I was a transportation officer. And upon getting out of the service, I joined the IT industry. And I've held a number of hats in that industry, starting with marketing, moving to sales, inside sales management, and for the past probably 15 years, project management. I now run a team of project managers. I do have a Naval Academy graduate on my team, but you can excuse that. But it's been a great experience, and I've just recently got done with a few rounds of interviews to augment my team, my project management team. My current company is one you may be familiar with. If you're ever at a wedding or a live event show, you'll see some speakers on pedestals or perhaps mounted on the wall. They're either going to be JBL or QSC. I work for QSC. So we manufacture and design amplifiers, control systems, servers, speakers, cameras, microphones. So anything you'd associate with audiovisual equipment.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Joe, would you mind giving a brief introduction?
Yeah, sure. So I am recently from the Army. I retired from the Army in 2021 after about 28 years. I'm actually Gag's classmate. In fact, him and I were roommates for our first year at the military academy. And I don't know if you put this together, but I think all the folks you have helping you today, we're all classmates. Bobo is our classmate. I think he's still in as a reservist, isn't he, Gags? He's like a 1 or a 2 star as a reservist, I think.
I believe so, yeah.
But and Hot Rod is our classmate as well. So we all know each other fairly well. But anyway, so I retired in December of 21 after about 28 years. Without getting into excruciating detail, I did have a break in service for a time. I actually got out in the late Army in the late 90s, back when you guys might not have even existed back then, but in the late 90s, it really wasn't a very good time to be in uniform. So I got out, came back post 9/11. I started my career as a field artillery officer. And then when I came back, I moved over to Intel. And that's what I actually retired as in 21. I retired as an Intel officer. Last tactical assignment I had was in Alaska. I was the G2 in what used to be called U.S. Army Alaska, and it's now the 11th Airborne Division. We were kind of instrumental in eventually getting that stood up, and I was happy to see it come to fruition. And then I finished my career at Fort Huachuca working in what's called Army Futures Command, where we tried to address a lot of the modernization that lagged over the last 20 years of fighting conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so that's how I finished my career. And when I retired, about 3 months later, I accepted a position with Raytheon. I live in Tucson, Arizona. If you're familiar with Raytheon at all, Raytheon is enormous here in Tucson. And I work as a program manager on one of their weapon system projects, one of their weapon systems that we make here in Tucson. If you watch any of the news about Ukraine, chances are you're going to see one of our products, and you'll probably see the product that I work on. But they're in the news quite a bit, Raytheon is. So anyway, that's just a little bit about me. I apologize. You guys are more tech savvy than I am. I don't know how to blur my background. I don't have anything to hide. So you're welcome to see what my home office looks like. It's a little bit in disarray. Just FYI for you, when you do interviews, I don't recommend this. I don't recommend that you have a background like this. If you look really close over my right shoulder, you can see my little bar, which I have set up over my my Raytheon workstation. I don't think you guys are going to hold that against me, but I wouldn't have this on display if I were doing an interview. So whether you kind of tailor your background so it looks professional or you blur it, it's up to you. But don't do what I'm doing. Don't do as I say, not as I do. So
Thank you, Joe.
Yep.
So today we're going to go through starting with the hiring manager, who's Boris.
John, if I may?
then to-
John,
Oh,
I'm sorry,
yeah,
if I
please.
may. Before we get started, I think Joe just brought up a great point. You have to be cognizant of all these different aspects of how you present yourself, especially on these web interviews. So the lighting, what you're wearing, what the background looks like, all important. Recently, I had a few candidates that came to these web interviews. One was late. Both of them dressed down for the second interviews. So I referred them to some colleagues for some further rounds of interview, and they showed up in sweatshirts. So show the interest in that role. Show them that you mean business, that you're serious about it. So I know for this, it's a very casual environment, but what Joe said is really important. Another one I want to stress is something that I've been working on a lot is is public speaking and polishing that. So if I'm going to embarrass you, I'm going to say that Juan had 3 or likes or us. Josh had 9, John had 2, Boris had 3, Joe had 16, I had a couple. So be careful with this, your public speaking or when you're answering these questions. If you start out with, I ask you, tell me about yourself. That does not project confidence. Have your opening nailed. And don't make it a generic statement or a rehash of your resume. Make it something impactful. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Ryan.
What'd you say?
Goodness.
What'd you say?
You got it in my head. It's in my head now.
That's good. It'll make you stop saying it.
So Boris is going to start us off as the hiring manager. Josh is going to then continue as the human resource manager. Currently, I have Ryan as the technical subject matter expert, but Joe and Ryan, if you guys want to swap roles or anything, I'm completely open to it. And then
Yeah, no, I'm good with that, but I do have a question. I was going to ask, do you have a problem if we ad lib a little bit? I mean, I looked at your questions and they're fine, but I mean, I think you'd get more out of it if we audibled a bit.
Yes, absolutely. Those are
I was a
example
football player too, just so you know. So yeah.
Those are example questions that we've been using. So when we're playing the roles, we have something to go off of as we're crafting our questions.
Great.
Feel free to ask whatever question you'd like. Once we conclude, we're expecting it to take about 30 minutes. Then there's going to be some time to discuss improvements, things that went wrong, or how to answer questions more properly.
Great.
So if everybody's good to go, Boris, if you wouldn't mind starting us off.
I'm sorry.
Under the weather.
It's pretty bad here. So I'm the hiring manager. So I have a couple questions for you. So my first question will be, I do have a question. I can modify the same question for you as well, or how to ask different questions.
Do whatever you'd like to do, Boris.
Or could you share an example of a time you communicate technical issues with a with no technical personnel. Like you was fast in the situation, you have information that you could have shared, but based on policy and stuff, you'd have to know, like when you sign the DNA stuff, how to like approach it to a non-technical person to explain to them. How could you did you got face any situation like that, and how did you approach it?
Absolutely. When I was in EXO in Syria, I had a problem with our electrical grid. And in that process, I received funding to improve the electrical grid. When the plans came with the required material, the material did not cover the entire improvement. So we had to alter the plans. In the process of that and gaining approval for the altered plans, there was a lot of times where I needed to explain the process to our non-electrical engineers that were assisting in the implementation of the new electrical grid, to my command structure to get their approval, in explaining why we couldn't complete the original plan, and also why the new plan would be an effective way of solving our current problem.
Um, my other question will be, how do you handle a situation where you have to, whereas like you have to communicate with the business partner about a situation that could compromise the company, and you have to deal with them. How could you handle that situation?
So I'm understanding that, are they doing something that could, as a security practice, compromise the company?
Yes.
Okay. I think it's important to, sorry, I think I just got your, I'm in the waiting room message. I think it's important to come to that individual prepared with how they have violated the company policy and explain to them how they can accomplish their same task while not violating the company policy, and then explain why what they're doing does affect the security posturing.
Okay. Okay. The last question that we have for you will be, could you describe a complex security challenge you were facing in the previous role, and how you approach and solve it?
Yes, I had a problem where we had to allow approximately 40 local nationals onto our base, approximately on a weekly basis, and we were unable to identify those individuals before they got to our base. So we needed to implement a biosystem so that we could, using their fingerprints, identify the individuals to make sure that they were authorized to come onto the base. The problem was that the biosystem was not functional in an outdoor environment, and our entry point to our base was outside. So to solve that problem, we built new roads, new walls, and established a building near the entry point to allow the flow of those personnel on that weekly basis.
Thank you very much. Now I'm gonna pass you to my to Josh, who is the human resource manager.
Okay, John, I want to see if you're a good fit for our team. So I'm going to ask you some questions about your prior experiences. I would like you to please describe a time when you worked on a security goal that required collaboration with colleagues from diverse backgrounds and skill sets.
So one of our security goals was to decrease the impacts of indirect fire on our personnel and equipment. To accomplish that goal, I worked with local national contractors and our Army engineers. Our Army engineers do have a diverse background, but having been indoctrinated into the Army, we all have a single point that we can relate to, and made it relatively easy to work with. The local national Kurdish people have a very different moral structure and a very different work philosophy than we do. So navigating some of the not only language barriers, but cultural barriers whilst constructing together was a very difficult task in a time where I worked with a diverse group of people. To answer your question of how I was able to make it function, we had a contract between us. So the first thing that I did was have it translated because not all of the Kurdish could read English. I had it translated into Kurdish using our linguists so they could understand the rules of our contract and our agreement, so they could enforce it upon us just as we enforced it upon them. And then we worked together to build out work timelines that allowed them to not only practice their faith, but fit into their daily life schedules.
Okay. Yeah, mutual respect of the contract. Awesome. My next question is, how do you balance the need for maintaining a strong security posture, that balance with fostering a positive and inclusive work environment?
I don't think that those principles conflict. So having a strong workflow or security posture that is properly using the permission sets and regulatory guidelines does not conflict with having a diverse workplace, unless you are somehow denying people permissions not based on work roles and basing it on something else like race or gender. So I don't see how those two principles conflict.
Okay, thank you for describing how we could possibly see some discrimination in the workforce. And I'm glad that you would work to fight against that. For 1 second. For your communication skills, I'd like you to describe your personal approach to resolving conflicts within a team. There are differing opinions that come up, especially when you're talking about securing the workplace, securing data, and just keeping generally inside information inside. So how do you communicate with people? I'll finish my question. During conflict. So how do you approach conflict in a way that is professional?
Most of the time, in my experience, conflict arises when somebody doesn't feel properly heard or understood. So when there is a conflict surrounding decision making, I think the most important thing that you can do is ensure that all parties have been heard, and then make sure that all parties have heard the decision that's been made. So a lot of the times you have a conflict where two parties have two different opinions, but nobody makes a decision, and that conflict continues down the road rather than making a decision and allowing both of those parties to work together towards the goal of the project or mission or what have you. So I think it's important that everybody's heard, everybody knows they've been heard, and then a decision is made to resolve that conflict.
Okay. I'll just give you one more question here. How do you handle stress and pressure in a fast-paced security environment? What strategies do you use to maintain a healthy work-life balance?
A couple of years ago, I would have said that stress and pressure are great motivators for me, and that I used them to work longer hours and be more effective in my job. But recently, I got too much stress, and now stress doesn't have that same impact. So I've had to find different motivations for work. But now that I feel a little bit healthier. To answer your question, I don't think stress is a large impact on how I make decisions or my workflow. Work-life balance, I don't have a family or anything. So when I'm interested in my work, I have the ability to work on it as much as I would like to.
Okay, and what do you do to de-stress?
Audiobooks are my favorite. I currently am going through the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. That's my favorite way of de-stressing and getting into my own imaginative world.
Okay, thank you, John. From here, I will pass it on to Joe.
Oh, to Ryan, Josh.
Oh, okay, so it's going to be our technical subject matter expert, Ryan.
Thank you, Josh. I'll approach this from a project management perspective. I think that's just where I was going to lean. So let's get started. John, tell me about yourself, and don't just tell me about yourself. What is your brand? What is it I get with you that I don't get with any other of the candidates that I'm seeing today?
I began my career as an Army officer where I worked in the operations center or in the operations section, and then was a platoon leader, and then was an executive officer. What you get from me is somebody that can solve any problem that you put in front of them. When I was a platoon leader, I was in charge of rail download at the JRTC exercise where I downloaded 1,500 vehicles. I'd never been on a train before. I'd never shackled before, and I'd never been in charge of 200 people before. But I figured it out, and none of our trucks or connexes got left behind because we accomplished it in the 3-day timeline. I never worked with electrical grids before. I improved an electrical grid. I never did vehicle maintenance before, but when I was placed in charge of vehicle maintenance, we had the highest vehicle maintenance in Syria. What you get with me is somebody that you can throw into any problem, and although I don't know the answer, I will find an answer, and although I don't know the team, I will build a team, and we will be an effective group together in accomplishing a diverse set of problems.
How do you motivate these people?
I found the best motivator for a team is to know them and to know yourself and let them know you. So as a supervisor, I've found it best to know their interests, to get involved with those interests. My favorite example of this is my supply sergeant, who is a really big fan of some rather explicit rap. But when we were stuck together in an office for hours and hours and hours, you best believe we blasted explicit rap music the entire time because that's what he liked and that's what bonded us together. And that's what allowed me to, or allowed him really to put trust in me. So when I asked him, hey man, this is going to really suck, can we do this together? Where he would say yes, and we could work together as a team.
Very good. You get assigned a brand new project. Very important cybersecurity project for the company. What frameworks do you rely on in structuring your project plan?
Because it's surrounded by cybersecurity, I would focus on the Scrum model. I think that's an effective model as you work on a project because it allows you to change what your outcome you really want it to be. So as those requirements change, it allows you to alter what you've been working on. I would recommend the Scrum or Agile method.
I would envision Scrum and Agile methodology to be the tactical way the work gets done on a daily or sprint basis. How do you structure the entire initiative?
Oh, I understand. The first thing that I would try to grasp is what the outcome is intended to be. What's the long term, what's the big picture outcome that it wants to be? And then I would want to understand who is being affected by it. So who needs it? Is it a bank? Is it healthcare? What are their workflows that are important so that we can begin working out base level permission, how they need that workflow to function so that everybody can communicate as required. Once I had that baseline workflow that they utilize and the outcome that they're looking for, then I would go into developing the proper IAM in groups to allow for the really like the legwork. I've been working in Microsoft 365, Purview, Entra, previously Azure, to develop a system for a company that functions properly with their workflow. And what I found is you really need to develop groups and roles. And then once you have your groups and roles, you can start separating them based on permission sets and teams. So I would approach this in a similar fashion where if I was developing a security infrastructure for somebody, I would initially start with grouping the individuals based on roles and responsibilities, and then begin to focus on providing distinct individuals with the capabilities that they need to accomplish their workflow.
What tools and techniques would you use for project tracking and reporting?
For project tracking, I think that the 15-minute stand-up in an agile method is effective for project tracking. For reporting, the end of cycle review is an effective method for combining all of your work and then reporting it to a hire in a white page or something like that.
Project's underway, goes off the rails, schedule is in serious jeopardy. What do you do?
If I know that the schedule is in serious jeopardy and that we are in deep water, the first thing I'm going to do is tell my boss. I'm going to notify him of the situation so that if I need additional resources or anything like that, he's aware. If he doesn't want to provide any additional resources, I can provide him with what insights I have as to where I see this going. And then I think that's the time where you need to review and find out why it's going off the rails. Is this a problem that we can't solve, or is this a problem where we're not working properly together? And then have a sit down with the team to get their opinions on why is this not functioning properly, so we can make a plan and move forward in solving it.
All right, my last question. Schedule, quality, and budget. Your boss wants this thing to land on schedule. The IT department wants this thing to have high quality. Your finance officer wants this thing to come in under budget. You can't have all three. What do you do?
I think you need to demonstrate to them how affecting these different levers will affect the project. So although they all want it to be perfect, you can show them, hey, if you want it to be, if you don't want it to be expensive and you want it to be on time, this is how it's going to affect the quality. Do you still want to do it that way? If it's not going to be on time, but it's going to be cheap and it's going to have quality, hey, this is how this looks. Let's look at how this is going to affect the business outcome of this product or of this project, and see which of these levers we can pull on to see which is going to give us an outcome that we can all be happy with in the end and be successful to the business.
Thank you. I'll now turn it over to Joe, our subject matter expert as well as program management expert.
Hey, John, how are you today?
Hello, Joe. How are you? I'm doing well.
Good. Thanks for applying for this position and giving us the opportunity to speak with you. I want to ask you a very basic question, because I've been looking at your resume, and pardon me if I don't understand all the terminology, but even though I don't understand a lot of your resume, it still looks very impressive. So I guess I'm wondering, you seem very successful. Why are you getting out of the Army? Why do you want to come work for us?
Yes. In the Army, it's very standard for people to fall in love being a platoon leader. You're in charge of 40 dudes. You're all by yourselves. You get to go do a bunch of cool guys stuff. And I got to do that. But when I was in the Army, I fell in love with being an executive officer, where you're in charge of maintenance and property and kind of everything that makes being an officer terrible in the Army. You get to be in charge of that. And that's what I really enjoyed. And that's what I really liked. As I was leaving being a company level XO, I realized I would never be able to do that again. There's not another opportunity in the Army where you get to do the things that a company XO does. So I began looking at things that I could enjoy in the civilian world. And that's where I fell upon project management. And that's where I fell upon and found cybersecurity as two things I found very interesting and shared some similarities with the job I really liked in the Army.
Okay, I mean, that leads to another question that I have about your resume. Again, not having the same kind of background you have, but I mean, what's the difference between being a company executive officer and a platoon leader, and what does a future operations and training officer do? That sounds like something out of Star Trek. What does that do? What do they do?
I'll start with future operations and training officer.
Mm-hmm.
If you can imagine that There's 15 people making a plan for the unit to accomplish. I was one of those 15 people making the plan. I was in charge of various smaller projects where really I didn't do the thing. I just coordinated and made sure that the standards were set appropriately so that the subordinate units, the companies, could accomplish those tasks. And then as a platoon leader, my job was to train and prepare a platoon to.
What is a platoon? What's a platoon?
A platoon is a group of 4 squads. Each squad's made up of between 8 to 10 people. It's about a 40-person unit. I was a light infantry platoon leader, so we were what you'd see in movies as the guys fighting on the ground with guns. So as a platoon leader, I trained those, or I was in charge of the training. I was responsible for the training of those 40 individuals, and I was in charge of the property associated with that small unit.
Okay, that makes sense. That clears things up for me. So we're talking about echelons here, right? Is that what I'm understanding? Is that this is you progressing up as you matriculated in rank? You gradually took on greater responsibility and a greater number of soldiers. Is that a fair assessment?
To an extent, I think it's fair. I would like to separate that as an XO, I was technically in charge or responsible for less soldiers, but I was responsible for more things. So as platoon leader, I was in charge of 40 soldiers for my platoon, but as an executive officer, I was in charge of, depending on the time period, between 5 and 30 soldiers, but I was focused on the entire company's support.
Okay. That's fascinating. I find that very, very interesting, but I don't want to hold this up for too long. So I see that you're doing an internship in Watertown right now, but your resume says you're still on active duty. How are you doing both?
I was very lucky when I was talking about getting out that my battalion XO, his name's Major Beckman, brought to my attention a CSP program, which allows service members to.
CSP.
Yes, it's also called the Skillshare program. It allows service members to take time when they are currently active duty and apply and attend internships to develop skills that will be needed to gain employment outside the Army.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a great program. Sounds like you got a great opportunity to take advantage of that.
Yes, I was very lucky that when I was made aware of the opportunity and time to utilize it, and then that my chain of command supported me in taking advantage of the opportunity.
Something else I noticed the other day as I was looking through your resume, I usually like to look people up on LinkedIn and just try to learn a little bit more about them. I couldn't find a profile for you on LinkedIn. That just seems a little strange, you wanting to go into the IT field. Is there a reason why you don't have a profile?
I do have a profile. If the link on my resume isn't working.
Oh, it is right there, isn't it? I just searched your name is what I did, so I apologize. I missed that right there.
Just in case you want it, I will drop it in the chat for you.
All right, no, I think I've got it. I apologize. There you are. I don't know why it didn't pop up when I searched for it, but at any rate, I see you. I see you now. Okay, so let me jump into a couple content specific questions here for you. So it sounds like you've worked at different echelons and you've had to make some tough decisions. Would you characterize any of the decisions you made as strategic? And if you've had to make a strategic decision, I mean, how do you kind of alluded to it earlier when in terms of making trade-offs, but how did you frame those strategic decisions with regard to the different kind of security, performance, and cost kind of trade-offs that you have to make?
The largest scale strategic decision I had to make was prioritizing the construction projects on our outstation in Syria. When I was trying to operate the levers, as I described earlier, I didn't have to worry about the budget. I requested and filled out the paperwork for.
Well, as a taxpayer, I don't know if I like the sound of that.
Yeah, so it wasn't my responsibility to worry about the budget.
As a sidebar, don't say something like that in an interview. Don't do that. You don't worry about budget. Don't. I know it's true, but don't do that in an interview.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, you're good. I'm just trying to figure out a way to rephrase my.
Let's just move on. Don't bad talk your old job.
Yeah.
It's not bad talk.
But also don't do what I did there, right? And say, well, shit, I'm a taxpayer, and here's this 24, 25-year-old kid wants to come work for my company, and he says he doesn't care about how we manage money, right? So, you know what I'm saying? I mean, yeah, I mean, money as you go through, as you work your way through the private sector is a big deal, right? So, and we didn't do a very good job. We kind of did you guys a disservice in the Army. I mean, one of the things I used to tell officers when I was still in, young officers, to say, hey guys, look, there's always more money, right? You know, I quick story. I was on an exercise we were planning an exercise in Alaska. We had a Canadian DCO, and our G3 was telling him, hey, sir, we're gonna have to scale back this exercise. We can't do X, Y, and Z because we're out of money. And the DCO said, how much money are we short? And we said, well, we're short about $1 million. And the DCO was like, said, guys, even in my Army, that's not a showstopper, right? And so, but that is not an attitude you want to carry into the private sector, right? Even if you don't really think that, don't even get the perception of that. Just stay away from it. Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go back to what you were talking about.
I would say our most difficult levers that we really had to balance was the amount of resources we had and the amount of time our personnel had. So we had to heavily prioritize the construction projects based off the framework presented by our commander, with a priority on implementing air defense systems and hardening structures where personnel worked or lived in. So those two factors were set above any other factors, and those were what were properly used to implement projects.
Would you characterize the organizations that you've worked in cross-functional as multidimensional?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd say yes.
Well, have you ever been in a situation where one function is at odds with the other? And when they've been at odds, how do you manage that? How do you handle that? How did you handle that?
The largest conflict with that I had, because we were trying to accomplish two very different objectives at the same time, was when we were preparing for deployment. So we had the two objectives of let's figure out how to do everything that we're going to need to do. And we also had the objective of let's not lose any of our property whilst doing it. And there was a lot of conflict in the organization because nobody that was in charge of the training of the soldiers wanted to participate in the let's not lose our stuff. I did not find an easy solution to that problem when it first occurred while we were deploying. I failed to bring everybody in and provide adequate direction or buy-in to accomplish that. And it left us in a bad state when we got there. But when on our way back, I found a much better way of doing it, which really involved having private conversations before I made this plan that I knew was going to cause conflict. But I had to have private conversations with individuals, with key leaders, and I had to say, hey, I know you're not going to like this, but I need buy-in, I need support, or we're going to run into the same problem that we had when we were trying to come out here going back. So I would say when there's going to be a lot of conflict and you're able to predict that, it's important to get key stakeholders in and have that conversation of, I know nobody's going to like this, but we need to come together right now, agree on it, and then so that when it's presented to a larger audience, we can move forward together.
Yeah, but how'd you frame that to them if you're talking to different stakeholders, right? I mean, how did you approach that with them?
So I had them present why each of their sides was required. So why do we need to accomplish this training? Let's let everybody know how important it is. Why do we need to not lose things? And what that came down to is, if not, we're not trained properly, people are going to get hurt. And if we lose things, people are going to charge a lot of money. So we had to present why each side is really important so that both sides could come together and work out a solution to not losing things and not missing out on training.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's all the questions I have for you today.
Okay, that concludes it. Ryan, Joe, I really appreciate it. We're going to go into the discussion section of this. To start out, Boris, Josh, Juan, I don't know if you got lost, but if you guys, any critiques or really things that you saw from your perspective where something went wrong.
I think you answered my questions really well. There I go with the ums again. So when I asked you a question about the culture and the people that you're working with, you brought up the subject of discrimination that may or may not happen. And it was good that you were thinking about that. So I'm glad that you brought that.
I think you did good. The most thing that I noticed was when you was asked the question and you talk about the budget, because it's a big thing for company to see people they're hiring how to manage their budget correctly, or just don't waste the time and the money. So you should not answer about saying like you didn't care about the budget and stuff like that. So
I agree. I agree.
So yeah, I mean, like I said, the answer you gave is an answer I've heard 100 times, right? So, and you're not wrong, right? You're not wrong, but you know, like I said, you really don't want to give them that kind of attitude. Occasionally, you run into this person that reacted like I did there when I said, "Well, hey, I'm a taxpayer. I really don't like the sound of that," you know, because there's plenty of people that think that the military does nothing but waste money, right? So you're not necessarily putting yourself in a good light that way, right? So, but I mean, even though it's absolutely true, right? I went through it in the Army. You know, we'd be out of money, and then a week later, you know, we have magically $1 million comes back into our budget, right? So the government is terrible about managing money, but in the private sector, you're expected to be better about it. So
yes, that's true. And also, it was good that Joe asked a question about like, because you have on your resume a lot of military terminology. It was good that he asked question about it, because we might face people that don't have nothing about military background, so we have to know like how to explain to them the easiest way so they can understand it.
Yeah, you know, Boris is kind of stealing my thunder there, but that's a good segue. And Gags probably can discuss this better than I can because he's a lot more experience in the private sector. But you know, a lot of those roles and positions, some people are just not going to understand it, and they're going to get turned off by it. And there are plenty of resources out there that will show you, hey, if you're a platoon leader or a company commander, this is what you can equate it to in the private sector, right? And if you look at my resume, the resume that got me my job at Raytheon, it doesn't say G2, it doesn't say, you know, Brigade S2, it says, you know, intelligence director, right? It says intelligence general manager, stuff like that, right? So I would encourage you just to go back and look at that and try to find some common terminology that people in the private sector can relate to. Gags, is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. You have to civilianize your resume. Absolutely.
Yes.
And one other point on that, it was, you mentioned you tried to explain it through maybe pop culture. All right, if you see this movie and the guy on the ground with the guns, no. As you get in the civilian world, you're going to find there's a lot of people over there that could be very turned off by guns. The first job I interviewed for out of the military was as a Pfizer pharmaceutical rep, and I got very far in the process. I had a ride along with a rep, and I was like, this is great. This is where I need to be. I'm going to get this job. She was anti-military in Colorado Springs. Gone. And I didn't even mention guns. Just she hated the fact I was in the military. Gone. Done. So no guns.
Okay. Really quick with the resume. Are you guys talking about just completely converting it to the civilian equivalent, or mentioning in there somehow that, like, hey, this is a civilian equivalent of this?
I wouldn't even have the term company executive officer in there. I wouldn't even have platoon leader in there. I would just have, like I said, I was a deputy J2 in Afghanistan, and I think I put international deputy intelligence director, something like that.
They have, excuse me, but they have like a sample about technical word from military to civilian.
Yeah.
You can maybe use those.
I've seen them. It just makes me feel a little weird, I guess.
Yeah, I understand that. It made me feel weird too, and it made me feel like I was diminishing what I did in the military. But like I said, it really doesn't diminish it. It just frames it in a better way, in a way that your audience can relate to it better, right? And so it doesn't change the accomplishments. I mean, you can still put the accomplishments in there, which are impressive, right? Maybe change, look at some of your terminology there too, like mission support site. They're not going to know what that is, right? You can probably rephrase that, right? So maybe a mission depot, or just a depot, or something like that. Maybe you can rephrase it. So it's not changing your accomplishment. It's just changing the way you're communicating with them. And you're going to find that, and that was a learning curve for me my first year out, talking to people. There's a lot of learning curves, right? That you're going to have to adjust to anyway. So you might as well get started now, right? And pronouns are a thing. That's no joke. I mean, that's a thing in the private sector. I know it's a thing in the military now too, but in where I work at Raytheon, trust me, it's all over the place. So I mean, that's just part of the culture change that you're going to have to adapt to anyway. Excuse me.
All right. If I can, Joe, you have any more feedback there?
No, go ahead.
All right. I'm going to start with some of the basics, and then I'll go through some of the things I picked up in some of your answers. So in terms of usage, language, grammar, fewer soldiers, not less soldiers. Anything that can be quantified is fewer. Anything that's unquantifiable, like mashed potatoes, is less. Less mashed potatoes, but fewer people. Acronyms. I think Joe pounced on this one. If you use an acronym, know what it means, or know what that acronym stands for. And if you can't, it's probably better not even to use the acronym. It's better to describe it. A civilian transition program. Okay, I get that. You said number of resources. No, you said amount of resources. I would say number of resources. So that is the grammar. You did a good job containing the ums. You weren't the worst offender. Joe was. Sorry, Joe.
As soon as you said it, it was in my head. And every time I said it, it messed me up more.
I don't believe you, Gags. I really don't. I don't think I used one today.
Let me count. All right. Jumping back into it. I want you to take a look at storytelling, YouTube, on the web, whatever. There is a format for it. You bring the audience in, just like a movie. You bring them into that setting. You set the scenario. Then there's the conflict. Then there's the resolution. John, you have some good stuff. This idea of working with Kurds and the cultural differences. You could really pounce on that. Picture this. You're in the Middle East and you're assigned this multinational task force. I have US personnel, I have Kurds, totally different cultures, work ethics, and now I have to deal with this challenge. How do I get these people together? And then your resolution, I made sure that we were protected contractually, but also it demonstrated my leadership abilities, able to motivate and connect with these Kurds so they became an effective augmentation of my work team. And we accomplished the mission, blah, blah, blah. We accomplished the task. Something, you have a big story there. Don't shy away from it and don't say it so clinically. Bring the person in and get them excited about it. Your DNA. I said, what's your DNA? I can solve any problem. A little bit braggadocious. I might say I am a problem solver. I've been in very complex situations, in some very trying environments, and I can get things done. That's who I am. The calmness under pressure that you'll see from me is something I doubt few of your candidates can demonstrate. Something like that. Think about it. Work with it. For me personally, I tell my future employers about the idea of a force multiplier. I can do much more than my role, and I can bring a lot of value. You're going to get 2 people for the price of 1, something like that. But you had some good examples, but you could talk about them a little less clinically. This idea of 200 people and unloading the train, and then the electrical grids and vehicle maintenance. There were a lot of neat things that you could build there, but keep it short. Give me what the key point is. Your DNA is you're a problem solver, and that's what you want that's what I want on my team. I want a problem solver. Great. The supply sergeant and the rap story was very good. It allowed you to connect with people, and it was a bit unusual. I wouldn't expect it, and it was good. It was a good story.
It is a weird one, but it is true.
It's good. One time I was helping a guy, a former officer, transition out of the military, and he was applying for a role. So we were doing the same thing. We're doing mock interviews. No, it was for grad school. He wanted to apply to the grad school I was in. And he was like a class behind me, or would be a class behind me. And he's like, I need a good story about like a challenge I faced. And later on, it came out that he delivered his own baby. He was in Georgia, middle of the night. A freight train, a gazillion car freight train blocks him from getting to the hospital. He delivered his own baby. He framed the white sweater he was wearing. And I was like, you have a great story. Why don't you use it, you meatball? So you have a good story with that rap music thing. That was funny.
Yeah, and I was can I jump in here for a second and say, hey, that is actually that great story. Your LinkedIn profile is a great place to put that, right? If you go into the about section of your LinkedIn profile, and I've been looking at it anyway. You talk a little bit about your about about yourself in the about section. But what you can do, I've seen people do, and I kind of do it myself, is you put in there, you write that extended paragraph, and then at the end of it, you could say something like, and if you've read this far, ask me about me delivering my own child, or something like that, or ask me about rapping with my platoon sergeant, and
it's
you
a
hook
hook.
them. And you'd be surprised how often people would be reading your LinkedIn profiles, prospective hirers reading your LinkedIn profiles. They get to that point and they say, you know what, I want to talk to that guy, right? That guy is interesting. I want to talk to him. The flip side of that is you got to be ready to answer the question. I have a little hook like that in my LinkedIn profile in the about section. And I was interviewing for Raytheon, and one of the directors was talking to me, and she was linking in my profile. And the hook I have is I talk about T. Lawrence and one of the quotes that he has, and I say, ask me about his quote. And she goes ahead and she asked me about it, and I was just not ready. It completely threw me off my game, right? It worked out for me, but I just was not expecting that. So that's the other side. If you're going to put something like that in there, right, be ready for that question. So
that's such a cool technique, Joe. I hadn't heard that myself. I might use that.
Yeah.
While we're on the LinkedIn resume, go ahead and get yourself some recommendations. Go ask for recommendations. You have nothing on your LinkedIn, and I go to that constantly for these candidates. I'll go, what do other people say about this guy? And a lot of times, by the way, while we're talking about interviews, a lot of times my litmus test is, do you want to work with the son of a bitch? And would you grab a beer with the son of a bitch?
Yeah.
Those are 2 big litmus tests that I use. All right, let's jump back into it.
When you, I'm sorry, Gag. So
Please.
When you ask for recommendations, don't be afraid, right? Ask ask anybody that you might have worked at. I don't care if it's a 3 or a 4-star general. Go ahead and ask them, because those guys are out there waiting to help you, right? They want people to help. They love helping junior officers, whether it be advance their career in the military or advance their career in the civilian sector. They're waiting for you to do that. One of the recommendations I have on my LinkedIn profile is David Petraeus. I had not spoken to him in 10 years, right? When I retired and I was looking for a job, I sent a note to him and said, "Hey, boss, maybe you remember me, maybe you don't, but we crossed paths in Iraq and we crossed paths in Afghanistan. I've retired. Would you mind helping me out?" Not only did he remember me, he wrote me 2 very enthusiastic recommendations, right? So you'd be surprised, right? Don't be afraid to reach out to those people. Don't be afraid to reach out to those seniors like that.
Good stuff, Joe. Absolutely. And sometimes you can prime them. You can say, look, I'd love you to talk about maybe the time, what you notice about my leadership styles. You can even write the paragraph in very simple terms. Say, hey, look, here's what I'm looking for. Feel free to modify it. You can definitely do that, but get some recommendations. When I asked you about how you structure a project, you jumped right into Scrum. Okay, I get it. It's a software project. Scrum makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm talking about, what about I think you're PMP qualified, right, John?
I'm currently going through it. Hopefully,
okay. The PMBOK table, that is the best thing about PMP. The rest of it, throw away. But that PMBOK table, it gives you that framework to say, I'm considering scope, budget, resources, quality, cost, stakeholder engagement, stakeholder management. I mean, that's what I'm looking for. Let me know that you already have this plan of all the aspects you're going to address in this project. Not, hey, we're going to meet once a day for 15 minutes. I don't care. I want to know that you can structure the project.
Okay.
So think bigger picture on that. Think PMBOK table. When I asked you what happens when the project goes off the rails, great answer. Stakeholder management. I'm going to keep people informed, let them know what's going on. Perfect answer. The Army question that Joe asked you, why do you want to get out of the Army? You got to tighten that up. I heard I liked working with my guys, my dudes. When it became not working with my dudes, I bailed. And all I'm hearing is you don't want to be promoted. I love my time in the military. I've learned a lot that I can apply to this, but something about, some cybersecurity fascinates me. I find it such a dynamic field. I always look for a challenge, and I'm a problem solver. I am just drawn to this role. Something like that. Not, my time was up with my homeboys, and now I got to go find something else to do. All right.
I could listen to gags all day.
Joe pounced on this one when you guys were talking about, well, I didn't do the work. I kind of structured the work. No, you exercised project management skills. You organized a project for 120 people. That's big. That's not, well, I didn't do the work. I'm just going to tell people what to do. No.
And I would say, just adding on to that, right? So a lot of the stuff that you do in the military is project management or program management. In my case, it's just a question of how you frame it on your resume and in the interview. I mean, when I got hired by Raytheon, I didn't have the PMP, right? I was retiring from the Army, and I said, hey, look, most of what I've done over the last 28 years is program management. Here's what I'm talking about. I manage these budgets. I manage these peoples. I said these deadlines. I did X, Y, and Z. And so I kind of framed that way. So, I mean, a lot of what you've already done as an officer, I would argue, is program management, is project management. Take ownership of it. Take credit of it. Don't say I supported it. No, you did it. You really did do it.
In fact, for your PMP, you're going to have evidence of projects that you've managed. So you already have to take your experience and put it in project management terms. Also on that note, even if you stress out, you can't think PMBOK table, you can't think of stakeholder management, quality risks, etc. The op board, the 5-paragraph op board, is a project plan. In fact, I use it in my own work when we're getting ready to do a hardware build. I have intent as the first paragraph on this Confluence page that I try to align everybody. Here's the intent. We're going to get 50 units out of this board revision in this chassis by this date. So people know, here's the big picture. So you already have a project plan in your head. It's the op board. Okay. that's all of my crazy ranting on your actual answers. Now I just want to take 2 minutes to pontificate on what can I share with you about the civilian world. And some of this I'm passing on from other mentors. First is I had an Air Force colonel. My first real job was at Radio Shack when I got out of the military. I could not find work in Colorado Springs. My wife kicked me off the couch and said, get a job, any job, I don't care. And she was right. It built self-esteem. Now, my Lieutenant Colonel Air Force boss said, hey, look, you knocked all your training out like in record time. You better start tooting your own horn. In the military, there's a formal system of recognition and everything's very visible. Your rank, your awards. He goes, you have to toot your own horn. So when you're in your civilian role, keep what I call Love Me file. It's your self-assessment file, and you keep it updated constantly. When it comes time for your annual review, you go to your Love Me file and they say, fill out your self-assessment. And you go, oh, I got a lot of material. And what you're going to find in the civilian world is your counterparts will not show up on time. They won't do what they're told. And when it comes time for self-assessment, they won't even submit it. Now, there's this pot of money in the middle of the table, and whoever gives the best self-assessment gets the pot of money or the majority of it. That's going to be you when you have your Love Me file ready to go. This is good stuff. I love it. Always have an opinion. When you're in the boardroom and they're going around, you're listening, be formulating an opinion, because at some point that boss may ask you, what do you think? And they just want to know that you're thinking. That's why they pay you, is to have an opinion. You described something very, very good. You described this idea of having to build support for a very unpopular decision or something that was coming down the road. That is a big thing in the corporate world. In my company, we use the Japanese term nimawashi. It means to build that support slowly, gradually, and keep increasing that circle of influence. So then when it comes time to spring it on people, they go, oh, I already knew about that. It's not a surprise. No one's going to grandstand in front of each other to shoot you down to show you how badass they are. It happens. You may have seen this in any business training. Think options grids. I find them very valuable tools when people go, what are we going to do now? And you go, well, let's look at what options we have available to us. You describe it in terms of levers. I do it as well. That's a great mental image to have. Look, we can do this, we can do that, we can do that, we can do that. Here are the benefits, here are the costs, here are the drawbacks, here are the risks. Think in those terms. And lastly, I think that was it. Thank you.
That's very helpful. I think trying to utilize the appropriate terms when framing the questions will be a big improvement on what I answered today.
Yeah. Let me, I think Gags probably needs to take a sip of water because he talks so much, but I think he hit everything. I have just a couple other things I wanted to talk about, and I will say first of all about your resume. I think we've kind of beat that horse to death, but I mean we'll beat it to death a little more, I guess. But everybody's got opinions on how resumes should be written, and they're all right and they're all wrong, right? So what I always advise people is put forth a resume that you're comfortable with and that you can defend, right? So if you're following someone else's advice, but you don't feel good about it, well, it's not doing you any good, right? You're the one that has to be able to explain it and defend it in an interview. So we talked already about the military terminology, get over the awkwardness of using the civilian terms, right? And just start adapting that civilian terminology for some of these positions. I should also say that in the military, whether you realize it or not, you're very much in a cross-functional organization, right? So but what I mean by that is that you probably have more than one boss, right? So if you're for instance, if you're a non-infantry officer, right, like I was as an intel guy, I had a 2-star general that I worked for when I was a division G2. He was my direct boss. I also had an XO chief of staff that I worked for, but also functionally, I had another G2 at my higher headquarters. I had the First Corps G2. I had the U.S. Army Pacific G2 that I was also answerable to. That is not uncommon in the military. And you will find that very frequently in the private sector where we have cross-functional organizations where people have a functional manager, right, that are providing a service to you that you are giving tactical, daily input to, direction to, but they are answerable to someone else, their functional higher, right? So in that sense, they have two bosses. In my case, I'm kind of fortunate because my functional is actually also my director. So I get daily guidance from him, but I also get higher guidance as well because he also happens to be my director. So I would suggest that, especially if you're interested in a project management, program management role, that you emphasize that. You say, hey, I'm already working in a cross-functional organization, whether it be a company, a battalion, a division, whatever. Make sure you're emphasizing that I provided guidance for these cross-functional teams as a company executive officer, right? So I provided, guidance to the S1, the S2, the S3, S4, right? Well, that's at the battalion level. But I mean, you understand what I'm saying. You have a supply NCO, you have a motor pool NCO, right? You have those things within even at the company level. So make sure you're emphasizing that because that is directly relatable to what you will find in the private sector. Okay.
And that is such a huge point, Joe. In my role, exactly as Joe described it, I'm the project manager, but I work with a technical lead, a supply chain lead, a manufacturing lead, and a quality lead, and I have to make sure all of them stay aligned and focused and motivated, and none of them report to me. And so you work in a cross-functional environment now, and you have to align them and focus their efforts on tasks.
And frame the experience you have that way, right? Because that's the role you want to pursue anyway. If you want to be a project manager, frame the experience that you already have that way, and it'll make it easier to explain it and justify it when you get to the interview. So talking about, Joe, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
So cross-functional, when they're asking about it, it's not multiple uses of like the unit. It's the multiple teams within the unit that are doing different things that you're managing. That's you managing the cross-functional team.
I keep reverting to the battalion level, right? But let's use the battalion example, right? If you're a battalion XO, let's say, right, you have an S3, an S2, an S4, an S1, an S6, right? Those are all functionals, right? Those are all functional teams providing a functional component that supports the organization, right? Now you might be rating them, but they also have a functional boss at their next higher headquarters, right? Either at the brigade or at the division, right? That's why they're saying, hey, I can't do this because the brigade S4 is telling me to do something else, right?
Okay.
So you're going to find the exact same thing in the private sector. You will find the exact, what Gags is saying is true. You know, I work with logistics leads, engineering leads, technical leads, software leads, they're all different functionals. And I give them daily guidance on what we need to accomplish, but I don't write their evals, right? And if they decide they don't want to do what I tell them to do, the only thing I can do is go to their functional about it. I can go to their functional that way. That's the only thing I can do about it. But it's not dissimilar to what you're doing in the military, what you've done in the military all these years.
Okay, that makes sense. I ate that or understood it completely wrong. So I'm good.
Gags explained it far better than I do. He explained it far better than I did. So I also want to say something about your LinkedIn profile, right? So I really think you need to flesh out your LinkedIn profile because you will find that a lot of companies that's all they're looking at. They're just looking at LinkedIn profiles and generating interviews based on LinkedIn profiles. My daughter she graduated from college back in July, and she's in England, and she's been, looking for a job, and it's all LinkedIn, right? I mean, she has they call it a CV because she's in England, but she has this resume, but she hardly ever submits it. Everything is done via LinkedIn, right? She's got her LinkedIn profile fleshed out. She shares it. She gets interest from somebody. She shares a profile with them, and she applies for a position right online in LinkedIn. So I would suggest to all of you, you really need to flesh out that LinkedIn profile. And that hook I was telling you about earlier, that is a great tool. It really, really is. I didn't come up with it, right? But it really, really is. So, and also on your resume and on your LinkedIn profile, don't be afraid to put a little bit of personal information on there. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes people don't care about it. But occasionally, you might run into somebody that has a common interest as you. On my LinkedIn profile, my resume, I talk about how I was very heavily involved in coaching Little League, and I got a lot of awards and stuff for that. And occasionally you'll come across someone who's like, well, hey, I coach my Little League's, team too. Maybe we could, swap stories or, talk about, lessons learned and stuff like that. So
huge point, Joe. People are looking for a connection. What's the commonality we have? I hired a guy. He's a very good project manager, but he happened to be wearing a Ducati shirt. And I go, oh, forget this. Let's talk about Ducatis because I have one as well. Let's talk about motorcycles. Sometimes that's what it takes. And also on your LinkedIn, you may want to start adding some of these credentials you're going for, working towards your PMP, because they may have, scrubbers that go through and say, oh, PMP, let's at least look at that guy.
Okay.
Bots or whatever that go through and scrub things. Folks, I do have to jump. This was awesome. You can tell that I love doing this kind of stuff. John, I sent you a LinkedIn invitation or a connection thing.
I did the same.
Yep. So
Ryan
please reach out.
I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining this and everything.
Thank you for letting us do it, Rod. It's fun, and I'm really glad that you're feeling better, dude. I'm really glad that you're doing well.
And Joe, sorry to hear about the shoulder. You're not a kid anymore.
Yeah. You know what I've been doing? I actually just fell in my garage is what I did. But every time somebody
I need a better story,
me,
Joe. I need a
well,
better
that's
story.
what I do. Everybody every time they ask me, I make up a more outrageous story than I did before. And because it's better than the truth. And like yesterday, I was talking to one of our functionals, our financial analyst. I was talking to him and he asked me what happened. And I told him, well, I went skydiving this weekend and my chute didn't open. And he believed it. He believed it. I had to after about 2 minutes, I finally let him down, right? And but he bought that hook, line, and sinker. So, but the reality is, I just fell in the garage, and I'm waiting to get an MRI. And then for some reason, it's hard to get an MRI in Tucson, but I'm waiting to get the MRI, and I'll see what happens after.
You work at Raytheon. I'm sure they can improvise. All right, gang, I gotta go. Go Army, beat Navy. Take care, Johnson.
Yep. Beat Tulane. So, all right. Hey, John and Boris and Josh, if there's anything else I can help you with, feel free. I think you all have my contact information. John, what I'll do is I already sent you a LinkedIn connection request. I'll email you a copy of my resume as well. It's not very current, but it's pretty current as of when I took the Raytheon job, and you'll get a good idea of what I'm talking about with regard to those different positions and trying to civilianize those roles. And feel free to share that however you like. So,
Absolutely.
And but you'll also see when you looked at my profile, it looks pretty similar to my resume, right? And there's a reason for that.
Okay.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks again, guys, and Rod again. Thanks for the opportunity.
One last more question. Is it one more question, Joe? Is it? Are you in Tucson like the one day in the movie?
I'm in Tucson.
Oh, okay.
Not Tulsa.
All right.
If I said Tulsa earlier, I apologize. I'm in Tucson. I'm in southern Arizona.
All right, got it.
Yep. Now I know what you're talking about. I'm a big fan of Tulsa King as well.
All right. Okay.
So, all right, gang. Well, hey, have a good weekend. If I don't talk to you before then have a great holiday season as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe.
All right, take care.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay, wow.